welcome to the event. This is a really exciting moment for me personally because it's the first public event of our new research centre, Bristol Economic Analysis, so we're very pleased to be here. In addition, this is a great event, part of the Bristol Green Capital 2015 and the Bristol Festival of Ideas, and we've had many people to thank, but we'll just stick with the Bristol Festival of Ideas people, my own university, the environmental INETs, and everybody here at the Watershed, Clio here principally. So, we've got a great topic, the green economy. What on earth is the green economy? Well, that will probably take us an hour or so. Then, what we're really interested in, though, is how we get there. Who takes us there? And with that in mind, we've got a really diverse panel representing different parts of society, the economy, and we're hoping that your questions will also really explore these relationships between these different parts. So, we are very pleased to welcome Alan Bailey, Chairman of Low Carbon Southwest. We've got Griffin Carpenter there from the New Economics Foundation, an environmental economist, ecological economist, who tells me that he specialises in fisheries. So anybody with any fishy questions, please turn to him. And then we also have Molly Scott-Cato, Green Party MEP for the Southwest. Also, though, this is how I originally met her, Professor of Economics, Professor of Green Economics, specifically. And holding all these people in check with the excellent Margaret Heffing. So, over to you people. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much and welcome to everybody here. I think what I'm going to ask our fabulous panel to do is give us a sense of what they think a green economy might look like. I'm going to follow up with a few questions, but we're very focused on leaving plenty of time for you to ask questions and make your contributions. So we don't want this to be a one-way transmission. So Griffin, can I start with you? You're an economic modeler. You're supposed to understand how all these pieces fit together, or if they fit together, or where they don't fit together. Could you just explain a little bit about what might a green economy really look like?
Sure.
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay, great.
Starting now.
Sure. So, just setting some of the groundwork, I think what might not be immediately intuitive when we talk about the green economy is that it's not just the environmental sense of the word, and that's really its contribution here, is that when we're talking about the green economy, we mean sustainability, and that means economic sustainability, that means social sustainability. So all these things need to go together. So when we're imagining a green economy, we immediately go into issues of inequality, because that really hits that social stability. You can't have a sustainable economy in the future, no matter how much you've done to address climate change and other issues. If there's social inequality, that's eroding the fabric. We might think of something about the financial system and the inherent instability there. So immediately all of these issues impact in your vision of a green economy. So I guess next, when we approach the issue of the green economy, I need to immediately start with a bit of criticism, and I'll try not to spend too much time here because we want to get to the good stuff in the vision. But in terms of why it's necessary, so just a bit to say how the current economy functions. We often describe it as the four U's, that it's inherently unstable, it's unsustainable, it's unequal, and it's unhappy. Got it. And so all of these things mean that not only is a green economy essential, that it's necessary and it's desirable as well. It's not like the current economy is working so well that we're kind of reluctantly addressing it because we know there's these environmental issues. And I mean, no matter what election pitches are going on right now, and there's some signs that some indicators of the economy are turning. Really, if you look behind any of the numbers, you can see that it's all an illusion. That job creation has been mostly self-employed, and this isn't kind of some upbeat entrepreneurialism, Schumpeter-style vision. This is people who are making 80% less income than the average worker. That the only reason why we're seeing a little uptick in real wages right now is because the oil price has dropped, which obviously cannot be pinned to any government action that they've done, and obviously isn't sustainable either. So behind any of the positive news on the economy, we see that there's still a real issue here. So I said I wouldn't spend too long on that, but just to say that it's both necessary and it's desirable. So what are some of the things that we would propose? So at the New Economics Foundation, some of the work that we've done is things like shorter working hours. So the tie-in with the environmental side is actually kind of interesting, that if you talk to people about maybe something like local food or something like that, growing food in your communities, people say, well, I don't have the time for that. So again, this is one of these immediate connections between the social space and the environmental space. We talk about things like strategic QE. A lot of the same arguments there. It's kind of a Green New Deal in another form, which is actually really interesting, that I could talk too long on this about why actual investments in green infrastructure have so much larger returns than anything else. And just to touch this briefly, that any investments in sustainable infrastructure, it's not crowding out private investment, because this is an area that's underdeveloped right now, so there's no issues there. That most of what we talk about in green infrastructure is actually really job intensive. To build bike paths, solar panels, research, there's a large number of jobs for that investment compared to something like an oil rig. For $1 billion, you'll create 1 or 2 jobs there. And so on the flip side of that is that any investment that is taking away energy use from fossil fuels and towards renewables, it's removing investment from areas of low job creation to high job creation. So I won't spend too much time on that. Other things we deal with is local banks. Really, localism is something that has obviously come up in economic arguments, but it goes through a lot of our work as well. Community energy, fisheries, I am trying not to talk too much on because it's my passion at the moment. And of course, I guess our biggest area of work would be redefining progress. So obviously, GDP, everyone knows there's several issues with this one. What we've proposed is one is the Happy Planet Index, and that has gotten a lot of press anyways, because it's kind of this interesting idea that says, well, the thing that matters most is happiness, but we can't get there at all costs. We need to protect the environment as well. So to measure the success of society is how much happiness have you created, and how many resources are you using to create that. So Costa Rica, almost every year, comes out on top. Really happy people, good policies, and they're not costing the planet to get there. And that's where I would spin to say, how can we create this green economy? And from where I'm sitting in my work, it's all about this kind of visionary narrative creation. Because what's really problematic right now is there's an existing narrative. So right now at the moment, you might think about austerity and how this idea that where the economy is kind of like your checkbook or something, and we've been overspending, and this is just such a powerful narrative, and it's so hard to break out of. And every policy needs to be able to fit that framework. Otherwise, people just don't understand it, and decision makers don't understand it. And I think political parties get into tough situations by fitting that narrative. So just one example is something like HS2 or something like that. Even the opposition to HS2 would say something like, we don't have the money for it. And that's fitting right into the austerity narrative. And so we're really conscious, and just to name it up, one person, George Lakoff, is the one who wrote a big piece on narratives that has kind of got everyone in the think tank world ruffled up a bit, because it is a challenging piece that says, how do we create new narratives? And you can't argue for policies that work against that interest. And this is where I think a lot of work needs to be done, because I haven't seen any narrative yet that is powerful enough to overcome the austerity narrative. So one thing that we talk about sometimes is these little phrases like casino economy or something like that. Something that's like really inherently unstable. There's a lot of luck involved. It's not just hard work that gets you to the top, something like this. So I'll leave it there for now, just to say that in moving towards the green economy, I feel like what's really necessary is to have that vision with the social, environment, economic aspects in there, and to put that vision in such a narrative that hits at people's values like fairness and things that everyone feels, and to put it in terms that that create this powerful space.
Great, thanks very much. Now, Alan, in the business world, of course, the best way to construct a narrative is to start something, have it successful, have a happy ending, have a good story. So what are you seeing is possible in the business world in terms of starting to create some of those stories?
If you don't mind, I did prepare a few words earlier to say this evening. The older I get, the less able I am to talk about, so that's fine. What is the green economy as well? So I spent literally meeting upon meeting trying to sort of help define what a green economy is. The difference in opinions on this can be quite vast. Part of the problem is the terminology. And coming from the business world, you'd probably expect me to say this. I will use the phrase green economy this evening, I'm sure, on numerous occasions. But those of us working with businesses and organisations every day on a commercial footing try to talk in terms of smart, intelligent, efficient, innovative, resource-aware phraseology, whilst aligning to the need to talk about competitive rates of returns. Part of the green economy is low-carbon goods and services, and even this has too narrow a definition. If you look at the standard industrial classification codes, or SIC codes, as they are better known, you'll see how narrow, possibly incorrect they are. So, for instance, a designer of a wind turbine will be included within our sector, but the manufacture of the parts that go into that will not. I believe the definition will and must widen as the sector matures. I think another issue is that it's actually classified as a sector, as it actually should be a cross-cutting thing that cuts through the way we live, the way we do business, and use resources. It should be embedded across all organisations, businesses and sectors, even government departments, and your environmental credentials should not be a bolt-on or an afterthought. It should actually be at the very heart of what you do and how you do it. If you meet as many organisations as I do, you soon realise that there is a huge gap between good and bad practices within businesses, and even between good and excellent when looking at their environmental credentials. A green economy will combine environmental goods and services with natural capital whilst needing to have a wider social relevance. But there are numerous barriers to achieving a green economy. Before mentioning those, I should flag up that achieving a green economy, in my opinion, is a fairly unlikely scenario for several reasons. Firstly, the prescriptive definitions are too narrow and opinions vary too greatly as to what is the point that an economy can be classified as green. Secondly, it is fair to assume that the businesses, organisations and governments that form part of that economy will want or should adopt a process of continuous improvement. This adoption, by its very definition, has no end destination, and there is always room for improvement as perfection does not exist. Thirdly, the sea change required in investment, infrastructure, political and industrial mindsets, transport and energy, to name but a few, highlight to me the need to be realistic that a green economy for an advanced industrialised country may be unobtainable, but a greener economy over a longer period is. There are many barriers, though, and we should look at along this painful journey that actually, if we break them, will help it to become a quicker journey. Lack of knowledge. What is green? Does it cost money? How do we engage? It does not affect me. Why do they all wear sandals? These are some of the persistent questions I hear on a regular basis when green is mentioned. But environmental business is big business with big opportunities for all. Environmental best practice is not going back to the dark ages, but requires all the talents and skill sets that we fundamentally need to drive business in the 21st century. Poor communication is another. Many of us here tonight will be conducting practices that are good for us, good for the economy, and good for the environment. But we may not be aware, of it. And even if we are aware of it, we're probably not communicating it to our colleagues, our stakeholders, our external partners, our staff, our customers, or our financiers. And I've seen this recently. I chaired a roundtable discussion of FDs and CFOs, and they started off by saying, well, none of us are doing any green initiatives. And I started to dig into detail, saying, well, have you done any lean transition work within your business? Yes, we have. We've had manufacturing advisory services, etc. Have you looked at embedding technologies? Yes, we've got solar panels just gone on our roof. Have you looked at your waste streams? Yeah, we're looking at waste and we're trying to reduce the amount. And so I said, you are actually all doing environmental business practices. You're just not necessarily aware, and you're definitely not communicating them. Skills. Most of the skills are and have been transferable so far from other industries to ours. But to meet the future demand, all schools, colleges and universities should embed a sustainability module into every curriculum and course. My understanding is UE now stands at 96% of all of their courses, degree courses, have a sustainability module or access to, which is fantastic. The workforce of the future needs to be more aware of the environmental challenges and opportunities that face us today. Finance, probably the one single biggest barrier to greening our economy. Only a fraction of what is required is being invested, and normally in the least efficient ways. Despite the political rhetoric, I personally believe that accessible, affordable, well-structured finance that delivers the flexibility that companies and especially SMEs require is still not available in the volumes that we require today. Without finance, which is the very lifeblood of greening and growing our economy, the journey will be an awful lot longer. Finance is only as good as the stable legislative environment that governments can provide us. In the past decade that I have been in the industry, I've seen so many policy changes and U-turns that it does not only destabilise the particular subsector normally affected, but also causes contagion for all other similar subsectors requiring investment. It is fair to say that the green economy is fairly low on all the major political parties' priority lists at the moment. I would also suggest that we are a small group of islands, small but perfectly formed perhaps, but we are affected by barriers outside our own control. Global events such as recessions, credit crunch, oil pricing, conflicts have all had effects, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, on our transition to a greener economy. So, we have a vague idea of what a green economy looks like. We've established how difficult it is to quicken the pace of change and why. So the big question is, what can we do to get us there more quickly? Strong governance, stable legislation with a long-term policy framework, let business translate policy into business opportunity or cost. To stay part of a reformed EU, to broaden the definition of the green economy. One of my personal favourites, statutory reporting of environmental practices within businesses. This needs to be accurate, quantitative, transparent, and used as a tool for companies to drive best practice and give them a competitive edge. This will help organisations view environmental best practice as added value, not added cost. And for governments to practice what they preach. Environmental protection should be at the heart of all decisions taken by government. Clear economic strategy. We need to enable sustainable growth, economic growth. I believe that we can increase GDP, jobs, levels of economic development whilst reducing our environmental impact, energy demand and emissions. Rebalancing of our economy, so we increase manufacturing and see reshoring of manufacturing. Products so they are made here with best practice and transparency for the consumer. A clear message that the UK is open for business by setting ambitious targets for energy from renewables, investment in low carbon goods and services, and our global sales of low carbon goods and services. To stop the UK from continuing to drop down the international league tables. Whilst our global ranking is in decline, our competitors are obviously taking advantage of the opportunities that are in front of us. This all needs investment, better access to finance with institutions like the Green Investment Bank, widening its remit in terms of subsectors that it engages with, but also being able to produce a lending and investment role. Wider access to R&D tax incentives and investment incentive measures. If we're investing heavily in infrastructure over the next decade, it must meet the test of being designed, built and operated in a way that will have a positive environmental impact. The supply chain opportunity for this is too big to ignore for emerging products, technologies and services. More money and support for innovation, bringing great ideas to life. Skills. The upskilling of the current workforce, the future workforce, will have sustainability embedded at an early age, and the broadening of access to skills, including accessibility for STEM, and allowing STEM to be seen as exciting once again. Knowledge-led training to deliver behavioural change, and more apprenticeships, which within our own sector has so far been fairly poor. So to conclude, I believe that some of the most exciting areas that can deliver the biggest impacts are the circular economy, energy, supply and demand reduction, emissions abatement, and changing the way we go off building fabric. We can also see new markets appearing in resilience, water quality, ecosystem services, and horticulture, and we'll add aquaculture for you as well, so because it is amazing opportunities. These individuals, all this can be delivered whilst allowing the green economy to have a positive social impact. The process of greening our economy allows us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do activities that can benefit everyone and take whole communities with us. Those individuals, businesses and organisations that do not sign up for a life of continuous improvement, that continue to ignore best practice, efficient processes and smart technologies, that have no transparency to their goods and services, or do not adopt social inclusion, will fall by the wayside as we become a more knowledgeable, smarter and efficient society. Thank you.
So Molly, from a European perspective, what does this look like?
Have I got some slides coming? I'm going to sort of revert a little bit to when I was in academia, be a bit theoretical rather than too European-y, but I'm very happy to talk about Europe when we get to the discussion. Oh, so that's a bit of a problem, isn't it? Yes. I'm just sitting under the slides. So my slides are really to help us visualise. I think I'll start with this one because I think I'm going to run out of time. Yeah, I'm going to have to hold this one. Oh, thank you very much. This is probably better. Now the challenge is not to fall off the stage, isn't it? I'll do my best. Perhaps that'll be more entertaining. So this, I've got two kind of alternative ways of looking at how we provision, how we meet our basic needs. And this work is actually from Hervé Girardet, who is based here in Bristol. And last time I presented this, at the end he popped up and said he was here. So if you're here, make yourself known. No, he's not here tonight. Anyway, so he looks at how we get hold of the stuff we need to give ourselves a comfortable life. And he visualises it in these two ways. And the first one is called Metropolis. And this is kind of how we live now. So there we are in the middle, that might be Bristol, city, urban settlement, and stuff sort of flying in vast distances, or it's being brought in by ship, and we are whizzing around all over the place as well to get to work or to fly around the world for holidays. And of course, this whole model is powered by a vast amount of oil. So this is a very energy-intensive way of living, and it's a way of living that we've really only been able to achieve since we've had oil, which is such an amazingly kind of responsive form of energy. And obviously there's two problems with that. One is the oil is going to run out, and the other one is that the burning of this fossil fuel is creating carbon emissions, which is obviously causing climate change, so it's what we need to change about the way our economy works. So here's his second model of the economy, and this might look slightly familiar if you're involved in some of the local projects going on in Bristol. So there's the city in the middle again, but this time, instead of everything travelling very long distances, we're reducing the distance of those supply chains, we're reducing the length of the supply chains, and much more of what we need to provide for our needs comes from much closer to home. So we have the urban centre, and then outside that, in these sort of concentric rings, we provide for our needs, whether it's food growing, whether it's providing the textile crops, generating our own energy, having grazing land, and so on. And, you know, we have much more public transport, much less private car use. I see there's only one aeroplane now. I'll probably cross that out altogether because I'm quite hard line about flying. You know, and there we are generating all our electricity from renewable sources. So it's a kind of different vision of how we might live. It's a much more localised vision. And actually that is obviously low energy vision, but it also means that much more of what we're doing is done by ourselves, and therefore it's actually much more positive in terms of job creation, I would argue, because instead of employing cheap people on the other side of the world and using energy to bring those goods to us, we're producing much more for ourselves. Now, the question of whether we've got the skills to move towards the green economy was already mentioned, but I think what we need to do urgently is a rapid process of industrial conversion. I think we do have some of the relevant skills. I mean, we could talk about that, you know, Alan has already mentioned this. But let's imagine that you can translate, say, aerospace skills into building wind turbines. That's the kind of thing we're thinking about, and I think we need to urgently think about the skills we have got and which skills we haven't got. If we were suddenly faced with a situation of war, this is what the government would be doing. It would be immediately converting our economy to produce what we needed in order to fight that war, and at the end of the war, doing the reverse. And I feel that this is what a government should be doing. We're in an urgent situation in terms of needing to make this transition to a green economy, and we need to have politicians focusing really hard on this and creating the incentives we need to make that transition. So let's just think about the incentive. I'll just mention this ELV, End of Life Vehicle Directive, because I think it's one of the really good things to come out of Europe. It's a bit nerdy, but I think it's really positive kind of incentive it puts into the economy. So what it means is the manufacturer of a car basically owns that car for all of its life, and at the end of its life, it's the responsibility of the manufacturer to dispose of it. So that automatically puts a backward pressure up the manufacturing chain, so that manufacturers think, well, I won't make a car that's just going to last a small amount of time, and then you've got to buy another one, which is the current incentive. But actually, it's in my interests now to make that car last for longer, and to make sure that at the end of its life, the components can be reused. So this relates to what Alan was talking about with the circular economy. It's an incentive to create the circular economy so that there's no waste at the end of the process. And it came from the Greens in Europe, and it's a really useful sort of directive, I think, to shift the kind of incentives that are driving the economy. This is also related to the sort of NEF view of how the economy might be structured. It's basically asking that same question that the Happy Planet Index asks, which is, all this economic growth, all this apparent wealth we've got, is it really making us happy? Now, economists call this the Easterling paradox, because they think that the more stuff you've got, the happier you should be. But to everybody that's not an economist, there's obviously no clear relationship between those two, because we know that you can't buy love and you can't buy happiness. You forget that since you become an economist, unless you're like Andrew and me, and you're a heterodox economist. Anyway, what this is plotting here is the relationship between GDP per capita, so your level of economic activity averaged out across your population compared to the social welfare, self-described social welfare. There's a bit of a problem with this graph if you live in a country where people are particularly prone to whinging, you know, it's not really a very fair representation. And you could just say that Costa Ricans are generally cheerful, so there's a little, you know, the self-assessed aspect is a little bit dodgy. But nonetheless, it's fairly clear that once you arrive above a certain level, and maybe it's, you know, it looks like it's about $20,000 a year there, but it's probably a little bit more than that. But, you know, the additional material stuff you've got doesn't make you a great deal happier. And so what our economy is doing is it's delivering lots and lots of raw material stuff to us, but it's not making us happy, because the other side of that is all sorts of problems, particularly we're too busy to make good relationships. And it's those relationships that make us happy, not having more and more stuff. I feel I'm saying too much, so I'm just going to point out a couple of things that I think are crucial to the green economy, which is that it will also be focused much more heavily on equality. What politicians have done, especially since the Second World War, is they've said to you, to all of us, don't worry too much about how much the person next door to you's got, because you've got a lot more than you had last year. So basically, growth is being driven by this process of you having more than your parents had and having more than you had last year, rather than focusing on how much you've got relative to the person next door. So what I'm trying to say is that the size of the economic pie is being used as a substitute for how fairly that pie is shared out. Now, if you get to a point where the economy stops growing, as we have got to now, people start asking much more pertinent questions about fair shares. And this is why equality is absolutely key to the green economy, in my view. This graph just shows you what's happened with the economic output since 1955. And so what it's showing you is the value of the value we create in the economy, how much of it goes to profits, people that live from investing money, relative to how much goes to wages, people that work, and I would argue create value. And you can see very clearly that the maximum level where wages was relative to profits is 1976. It's that time that anybody old enough can remember was a time of massive union activity. So it may have been the 3-day week, there may have been a lot of problems there, but what that union activity achieved was working people got a big share of the economic product. And you can clearly trace that since we had the Conservative government elected, and this I think was the point of that politics at the time, the share that goes in wages is declining and the share that goes in profits has increased considerably. And that's, although it goes up and down, that's basically a sort of trend that's fairly fixed now. So how are we going to share out the economic product between the people that earn that money and the people that have provided financial investment, I think is a key question in designing the green economy. How long am I sort of running out of time?
We've got 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay, I'll do this one slide. No, I won't, I'll skip that one because that's a bit more boring. Let's just do this one. This is one that's got a really good story behind it. People often say, you know, is the green economy about changing your light bulbs? Definitely not. There's a lot more to it than that. But here's a story that might help to illustrate what's wrong with the way our economy is organised at the moment. So this is a story about built-in obsolescence, and it's a story about a conspiracy, not a conspiracy theory, but a conspiracy fact, which was that in 1924, the manufacturers of light bulbs all got together, I think it was in Geneva, and they decided that they weren't making enough money out of their light bulbs because they just lasted a really long time and they couldn't keep selling you a new one. So what they did was they got their engineers to design a much worse light bulb. I think it was 10,000 hours maximum, and after that amount of time the light bulb would blow up. Incidentally, lots of designers and engineers walked out of those companies because they were so irate about this. But they found enough people to do that, and since then we had really poor light bulbs that blew up regularly and you had to keep buying new ones. This is just a good example of built-in obsolescence. Now in a profit-driven system this makes sense. You just want to sell people more stuff. And every time you sell somebody something, you can make a profit. If you mend something, it's much harder to make a profit. And so I think this is a key design flaw that we need to change, because it's terribly wasteful of resources to have an economy that works in this way. Obviously, this is just one example. But anyway, this is the longest lived light bulb in the world. It's 110 years old, and it's in the Livermore fire station in California. So, you know, that long ago we could make light bulbs as good as that. It's not about the design, it's not about the technology, it's about the social processes driving the economy. I think that's a crucial point about the green economy. Anyway, I just put up my advertising slide to finish with. Please keep in touch with my work in the European Parliament. There's lots of really interesting stuff that goes on there, which for some reason, best known to themselves, British journalists are not very interested in. But if you want to know what I'm up to on your behalf, please follow one of these sources of information. Thank you.
Feel free to volunteer to attempt to answer it. Is a green economy a growing economy?
Yeah, it's kind of in my remit. It's a funny one because I think different people at my organization would answer that one differently. So I might need to take my hat off slightly.
We won't tell.
To answer it. Thank you. We're not cameras. But I think we've kind of moved to become agnostic about growth in a sense, whereas we probably evolved out of a movement that's more anti-growth. So I'll kind of explain what's going on there. I think it's because we're kind of balancing these criticisms at the same time that GDP is a really bad measure of anything useful, and at the same time, oh, GDP is really bad because climate. And so either it doesn't measure anything or it is an important measure. And you kind of can't have both. And the reason is because we talk about GDP often as an aggregate thing. But behind that, there's all sorts of activities that may be good and they may be bad. And so if we install a solar panel tomorrow, obviously, that increases economic activity. while doing good things for the environment at the same time. So we want that. That's GDP growth that we're okay with. I'm trying to avoid it, but fisheries. And so we've overfished our waters. If we were to fish our waters sustainably, the stocks would rise, we would have more catches in the future, that would be a higher GDP because we're doing the sustainable thing. So there's lots of cases where the environmental thing and GDP growth may in fact go together. So you need to look behind that, and that's why I think we're becoming a little more nuanced in that view. Now, the flip side of that is our economy is structured a certain way right now. And next year, if the economy is, let's say, 1 pound larger, that's about half a kilogram of CO2 that's associated with that. So the way the economy is structured right now, we would expect that any growth would be associated with more carbon. So we're making it harder on ourselves to address carbon while the economy is growing. So I'll just park that there. I guess to kind of summarize in all of that, maybe. It depends on the composition of the economy. So we may eventually get to a point where the economy is so green that we're okay with growth, but in its current structure, growth is doing more harm.
Growth is green.
Yeah.
Alan?
Well, what I would say is that the analysis that's been done on the different sectors since 2008 has shown that the low carbon goods and services, and I know previously I said that that's quite a narrow definition, the low carbon goods and services, that sector rose by just under 5% year on year throughout the recession. So I won't say we're recession proof, but we are certainly a sector that seems to be growing even against a backdrop of international recessions and tight credit crunch and so on. So I think there is a definite push that we are seeing activity, and significant activity within our sector that's allowing the growth to happen.
And Molly, the green economy that you painted for us in your slides is a very different place from the one we know now. Am I right in thinking that what you're implying is that globalization's done? Because certainly I would imagine for many people in this audience, the prospect of never flying again is a little bit startling. Yeah. The prospect of getting products from around the world is a little bit startling. So how radical a shift are you really talking about? Because it looked pretty radical to me.
I think it is pretty radical. I think I would be more hard-edged about the growth question than Griffin was. And I think that's because I am genuinely trying to live within what is a sustainable amount of carbon dioxide production. And essentially everybody in the world has about 1 tonne, and we are producing about 2.5 tonnes per person in this country. And so, you know, you've got to shrink your output personally by about 20%, I mean by about 80%, and I think that doesn't even take into account the amount of your carbon share that was spent on public services. So, you know, we're looking at 90% reductions. To keep within the limits we need to stay within in order to avoid, you know, really horrendous climate change. So it's not like I'm saying you must never fly. I'm saying if you want to maintain a livable climate on the planet, you have to reduce your carbon dioxide emissions by 90%. And last time I looked at the figures, a one-way flight to New York was your whole annual allowance. So you can't come back and you're going to be covered. So, you know, that's, I mean, I actually think there are a lot of benefits in having a local yeah. And since I flew last year to Brazil and I came back by ship, so you know I didn't eat baked beans out of a tin all year. But I think once you start looking at the world in that kind of way, you just travel in a different kind of way, and it has its own compensation. So I'm going to Moscow to see my daughter, and I'll go by train, and it'll take 36 hours. And it will be a nice adventure, right, rather than just sort of 5 hours on a plane, which I must admit I don't enjoy much anyway, so maybe this is quite easy for me. But I do think it's not like, I mean, people often will say, oh, Greens are, you know, trying to stop you doing things and being all hair-shirty about life, but it's really not about that. It's about looking at the science, seeing how much carbon dioxide we can put out without destroying the opportunities for people in poorer countries or future generations, and then just being responsible.
And do you think a green economy is necessarily more equal? Because I'm very it seems to me that there's a tension here, which is there is one argument about a green economy that says basically it's pretty much like what we have now without all the environmental litigation. So it's market capitalism minus carbon emissions, and versus another one which is saying actually it's a whole new ball game. So we get rid of carbon emissions, we get rid of inequality, we get rid of globalization, we get rid of all of the massive economic drivers of the last 100 years to go to a new place. So my question to you is a green economy necessarily the antidote to inequality, or have they just been conflated?
I don't think I explained this very well when I was speaking, so we'll have another go. But I basically think once you realise that the size of the pie is limited, and I think the size of the planet is limited, I don't think you can argue with me from physics on that. You might be able to argue from neoclassical economics, but once you accept that there's a limit, then you must think in a much more focused way about how stuff is shared out. And that argument about equality has been sidelined by people saying, oh, don't worry, because there'll always be more and we'll share that out. The sort of Ferraris for all argument. Yeah. I just don't buy the Ferraris for all argument. And just going back to whether you're going to have any coffee to drink in my paradise of the future, I have this little thing called trade subsidiarity, which helps me think about that, which is to say, you look to the local first, and if it's not available locally, then you look further afield. So yes, you can't produce coffee at the moment in Bristol. So I'm not saying you'll never have coffee again, but it will be traded in a fair way. The people who produce it will be rewarded fairly, and the environmental cost of bringing it here will be reflected in its price. So coffee will be much more expensive, but you won't not have coffee anymore.
Okay. I think at that point we should open it up to the audience. You can get over the shock of the prospect of less coffee. Who would like to kick off? The gentleman there over there. Yeah, holding up the pen. Yeah.
Hi. For me, there's a big question around the issue of power and how power gets devolved down. I think capitalism is probably the most ineffective form of economics to deal with the crisis that we're looking at. And I can't see how businesses and business is going to rein itself in and do what's needed to be done. I'm involved in Left Unity, and we would like to see renationalisation of all utility companies, the banks, and so they're back under public control. I don't want the businesses to take the community with them. I want the community to be dictating how we structure society and how we're going to deal with these problems, rather than it being this hierarchical top-down approach. We see with just the TTIP, we're having liberalisation of our markets, and even potentially the NHS. That's no one, I don't know anyone who individually wants that to happen. So my question is, how do we deal with those unequal power relations?
Alan, can you take that?
Yeah, I can only speak from personal experience. So I work with businesses from startups to SMEs to corporates, and generally I find business to be a force for good. I do not share the view that all businesses or corporates are corrupt, or that they try to completely screw their supply chains all the time, or it's all about maximising profits only. I just don't subscribe to that. I see within corporates them doing things not just because it's regulated, but they're actually doing things because they need to, they have to. Yes, I think the way that capitalism is now is manifesting itself, how it's structured with public listed companies, with shareholders that you have to obviously work with. I think it is difficult, and I think there are pressures there. But most of the businesses, if you want to see a transition movement of organisations being able to really put big budgets into doing great things, then actually look at some of the corporates, what they're doing. I mean, the impact that they're having in terms of the way they operate their businesses, the way they do their processes, it is highly efficient. It's becoming more and more efficient.
But they don't pay any taxes. Most of them just evade their tax.
Most of the FTSE listed companies pay an awful lot of tax, and most of our pensions in this country, most of the taxes come through lots of the big companies that are listed here. I think they are genuinely powerfully good. I don't agree with everything they do, but I have to say, everything that I've seen is when it comes to greening the economy, they're engaged. You take a company like Unilever, you know, they're doing fantastic work. You take some of the big retailers. Retailers get a lot of stick for some of their practices, but they are cleaning up. They are cleaning up the way they do things. In terms of greening, I have to say the levels of engagement I see, talking to them about how we can embed technologies, how we can, you know, best practice, they're really engaged. They want to do it, not because they necessarily have to. They want to do it. They see that there is a way where doing these things will give them both green credentials, whether that's a byproduct of saving money and becoming more efficient, that's up for debate, but they're certainly doing it. And for me, if getting these companies more efficient enables us to have a byproduct of them becoming greener, then I'm all up for that.
Molly?
Sorry, I didn't answer that. There were more things I wanted to respond to. The way I see this is the role of government is to set the right incentives for what's good for people and the planet. This government's clearly not doing that, but I think another government could do that a lot better. And I also think it's the role of government to fund and own, on behalf of the people, basic infrastructure. I would include railways, I would certainly include the national grid. I think it's very difficult to go through the sort of change we need to go through as urgently as we do without government providing that framework. But having said that, I would agree with Alan that businesses are actually making some of the most rapid moves here, and partly because people vote for the wrong parties, in my view. Incentives are not being given clearly by government, and sometimes businesses are taking a bit of a punt on this. But I wouldn't, so just one example of this. One of the main reasons we can't use all the fantastic renewable energy resources we've got here in the southwest is because there's limited grid capacity. Western Power Distribution run the grid in this part of the world. They simply haven't invested in it enough. They also make, I think, over-conservative calculations because they're afraid of it collapsing. And as a consequence of that, we're seeing the investments that people will be prepared to make, people and companies in renewable generation, not being able to go ahead. Now, I think it's a government's role to own that infrastructure and to invest properly in it. I also think, incidentally, Paul's still there, I think this is something that the Juncker plan should be doing from the European level. Grid upgrades, it's not very glamorous and sexy, but it would hugely transform our ability to make our own electricity. Another thing just to say about business from the European perspective is a very powerful lobby there called Business Europe, which I think is extremely negative in the way it lobbies. I'm sure it lobbied against the End-of-Life Vehicle Directive. At the moment it's lobbied and I think persuaded the Commission to withdraw the circular economy package, which was one of the best things to come out of the last parliamentary mandate. I mean, I know the circular economy package has been withdrawn. I can't prove it was business lobbying that did that, but you know, the whole lobbying around sort of cutting red tape, lighter regulation, that's not what this is about. This is exactly the role of government to provide those incentives, but business, if it thinks it's not profitable, it will lobby against that. Now that should be resisted, and lobbying should be really severely curtailed, I think, at all levels of government, but particularly where I see it in Europe. And just on your question of tax avoidance, that's the main thing I'm working on. I gave a speech to the plenary in the Parliament yesterday about that, and I completely agree with you. I think we should distinguish between local businesses who pay their taxes and are an important part of our local communities, and transnational corporations who were basically set up in that way precisely to be able to manipulate governments and to make the world serve them rather than them serving the world. And the level of tax that's paid now, you know, I mean, in the case of these Luxembourg scandals, it was like 1%. The sort of other 30% or so they should have been paid would have mended the roads, would have paid for us to have proper hospitals. Anyway, to be honest with you, I think we're working very hard on Europe on that, and we've got, you know, the left group with us. And I do think during this next 5 years, well, I really hope we're going to be able to, and this is also partly down to you, lobby, please, put pressure on, because when it gets to the final stage, it will be national governments, and every time with tax, they try and veto this policy. So we're fighting away in the Parliament. The Commission wants this because they can see that societies are failing because of lack of public investment, but it'll be the national governments that will try and veto these proposals. So please follow me on the website. And when we said, yeah, you know, lobby your government, please try and get MPs to support this, because the outcry against corporate tax avoidance has been loud, but it must be sustained and it must put pressure on politicians to do the right thing.
Two main points. So I think we're asking companies to do something actually quite difficult. Is we're saying on the one hand, we've created a structure in which you exist because you make profit. And if you didn't do that, then another company would go along with smaller margins and take your place. So that's the structure they're operating in. And then we have additional things we want them to do. So an example of this would be the energy companies with their eco obligations to make green homes. So why on earth, if you're an energy company, would you be interested in improving the efficiency of homes so people use less energy? That's a ridiculous ask to put on companies, and that's just a fact of the structure that we're in. And so I take Molly's view on this in a way that I would almost turn the business problem there into a political one and say, okay, they're acting as we would expect them to act in that system. So really it's a system design problem, so much as it is the business owners themselves. Just one more point on power. I mentioned before that we think a lot about narratives. We need to tackle the austerity narrative and we need to develop our own. I would put beside that power as well. We need to tackle power structures and we also need to build up our own, because you know, as an isolated group, if you're an activist group of 10 people or something, you're probably not going to change the world, but if you link up with others, then you can create a new power structure that people in the future will be saying, how did they get so much power?
Right, thank you very much. Other, sir.
Good evening. I'm not sure it's working. Anyway, good evening. I'm Martin Big, and from the Environmental Innovation Network, I'm really pleased to be supporting the discussion this evening. But my challenge is, how do we really encourage environmental innovation, environmental change, when, dare I say, politicians, with all respect, tend to work on if we're lucky, a 5-year horizon, and it's who's in last comes up with the best initiative before someone else comes along and replaces it. And so we get chronic lack of certainty when it comes to green investment.
Yeah, thanks Martin. As you know, a particular area of interest of mine. Yes, part of the problem I think with innovation is that certainly as you know, we're dealing with many products that are coming through, it's not just the political short-termism of that, it's actually I have to say this is where the companies do fall down as well. Most of the companies need to see a fairly rapid payback in terms of the investments that they make in new, innovative, disruptive technologies. They need to see, you know, most of the ones we're working with, they need to see under 3-year payback on their investments, otherwise they won't do it. And one of the reasons for that is not just because they need a rapid payback, they're looking over their shoulder all the time, what else is on the horizon. So some organisations get quite crippled in terms of actually embedding and helping to take technologies to market, because they're so scarce they're missing out on what actually could be the better product around the corner. So that's one thing. As I said, the other thing is I think we do need politicians to, not in a lobbying way, but we do need to make politicians more aware of what's out there today and how it could be implemented today. So for instance, this may not be a very popular comment, and say sorry in advance to Molly, but I know you've heard me say this before, Martin, as well, but fossil fuels, they're not the enemy here. They're not the enemy in terms of emissions. We have technologies coming through today rapidly that are being scaled up that can abate all of the greenhouse gases that are emitted from power stations and from CHP, etc. So actually, we've got an opportunity here. We've got an opportunity to continue using fossil fuels, but completely abating and actually adding value in terms of the emissions coming out of the back end. But the problem is, those sorts of things are coming through, and they're coming through fairly rapidly. The politicians aren't aware of them. You've got various layers of civil service that are working with technologies, and they're helping to bring those to market. They're supporting, there's innovation grants, there's R&D grants, there's all sorts of tax reliefs. There's all sorts of things going on, but the politicians and the people who can truly make major changes with some of these things are not necessarily aware. And what I'd like to see is actually I think it's in one of the manifestos, but a low carbon sort of office. I think it's in the Lib Dem manifesto for this election actually. But I would like to see a low carbon office for basically technologies to be able to make people aware quicker of what's coming through and what impact it will have and what support it needs. It's not always about the money, it's about the other support as well.
Molly, I see you fuse.
Just to carry on straight from where Alan left off, I think, you know, if you know any Greens, you know that the thing that really gets them going is all these new energies, and they're complete nerds, aren't they, where energy is concerned. It's not particularly my bag, but honestly, I'm sure if there's something out there, the Greens in the European Parliament know about it, because I have these conversations with those guys all the time. I haven't seen something that will take all the carbon dioxide out of a power station at scale and mean that there's no longer any being put out into the atmosphere. If I saw that, I would be as delighted as anybody else in this room. There are some kind of experimental scale, and some of that work's being done in the surface, and it's really exciting. And like everybody else, I want the technologies to work, because the problem is urgent and we need to solve it. But I'm not convinced that the whole issue is about techno-fix. I think this is one key aspect of what the green economy is about. Is it social redesign, or is it just technological redesign? I think, as I already pointed out, in terms of built-in obsolescence, and you could also make a similar point about advertising and consumption and the way we're sort of driven to consume more than we need. These are major design flaws, social design flaws in our economy, and the technological fix isn't going to sort those out. I totally agree with your point about the chronic lack of certainty. This is one of the most depressing things. I think Labour did some good things, you know, setting the agenda with the Climate Change Act and then bringing in the feed-in tariff. And the fact that that was reversed was almost worth sort of not bringing it in. And then it sort of changed several times because investors got really nervous about that. And I'm slightly suspicious that that might have been deliberate, because I do think that the Conservatives are pretty close to the fossil fuel lobby, and that concerns me, because I think we need to definitely be evolving beyond our sort of fossil era. But I think we can do things about that ourselves. One thing is, I would say, if some more of these structures were publicly owned, then the government can invest on our own behalf. We don't have to think about profits. We just think that's a good thing to do and put the money there. We can also do that as individuals, community energy projects, or, you know, community investments generally. If we think that's a good thing, we can put our money there as well. And I just wanted to lastly say something about the more political point. I personally think democracy works, but it only works if you use it. So if you carry on voting for parties who are letting you down, you're making a mistake. I'm not saying vote for the Green Party necessarily. Start your own party. This idea that there's a political class and you've got the choice of these three classes and they're all duffers, this is just a mistaken analysis. The whole point about democracy is if there's nobody there you trust, put your name on that ballot paper or ask his friend to put their name there so you can vote for somebody you believe in. Because that's how democracy works. It's not about making a choice between bad alternatives. It's about the possibility for you to create a good alternative. I think I've done that with the Green Party. If you don't believe in the Green Party, do that within your own way. But we need to use democracy. We need to make it work for us so we can vote for these changes that we want to see.
Right, thank you. Yes, there's a...
I'm interested in this question of upskilling the workforce, or just in general upskilling, because not only does it seem to be necessary for a green economy, but I'm sure it would improve well-being and people's self-worth and understanding of the world and lead to a more engaged society. We have this upskilling, yet I know that adult education was one of the first things that got cut following this current government, and it doesn't. I wonder, it's interesting from an industry perspective, is that upskilling happening within private corporations, or are there moves for further education to engage, and higher education to be engaging in this kind of reskilling that's necessary?
Great, thanks. Alan, you want to take that? You put a lot of emphasis on how much education needs to do. How are we going to have a green workforce?
Well, I can only talk from personal experience, and I think there's positive things. As I said, University of the West of England, I know several years ago there was an ambition to try and have 100% of all the degree courses, students being able to have access to an environmental sustainability module, and it's 96% now, and I think that's fantastic in a very, very short period of time. That's actually transitioned very quickly. And I think that's important that from as young an age as possible, that our future workforce is getting access to at least being aware of what the issues and the opportunities and where the threats are coming from for the future. I'm also a director of a new scheme that was brought in over the last couple of years, which is UTC. So I'm the director of the University Technology College in Filton, and that's about taking 14 to 18-year-olds and basically giving ours is the Bristol Technology and Engineering Academy, and we're very focused on aerospace, unfortunately, but also low carbon as well. And I think that's actually very good. That dual purpose of being there for aerospace and advanced manufacturing and low carbon. We're able from a very early age again to build in knowledge of the engineering community and what skills they'll need to get jobs when they apprenticeships or jobs or go to university to continue engineering. But actually we're trying to embed low carbon as early as possible to say these are the other opportunities once you've got your engineering qualifications. And then I have to say places like City and Bristol College, I have to say I think they've got something like 20,000 students. But again, they're making a big play towards getting students as, I'm going to say desensitized, but I don't think I quite mean that, but basically aware of these things as quickly and early as possible, and they're trying to adopt that across many courses and within the curriculum. So that's really, really important. But I also think the other side, that's great, there's some great progress being made. Where it gets slightly more difficult is existing workforce. Because actually, your workforce, if you employ, if you're Bristol City Council and you employ 10,000 people, every single member of staff should have an understanding of what sustainability is, especially as we're European Green Capital as well. But if you're any business, your staff should have an awareness and be able to see how they can input into the opportunities that are there. And I think that is starting to happen, and I think with more flexible training, as has just been brought in as well, where employers can actually sort of pick and choose how they get their skills training. I think that's really, really important, is flexibility. But I do think businesses do need to look at their existing stuff in particular, because lots of people are very unaware of what, to go back to a few of the points I made earlier, the questions that we get from people, they're just very, very unaware of what the green sector is and what it entails and the sorts of things you can do to try and have a positive impact.
So how many people here would describe themselves as in the workforce at the moment? And of those, how many are getting any kind of training in sustainability or green economics? 2, 3, 4? Okay. So that's a problem. Yeah. Did you want to move into that?
Yeah, I was about to say that exact point. I mean, we saw Molly's slide earlier with investment going down from the corporate sector. Also, investment from the government in education is going down as a percentage of GDP. The government's investing less in education. Businesses are doing less investment as well. They're sitting on profits, which is basically the biggest problem with the economy right now, is sitting on cash piles. You tax them all. How do we switch up there? And so obviously this is a problem because it's one of the most important parts of transitioning to a green economy. There's a lot of work to be done in a green economy. And I think an important point is there's been lots of shifts throughout the economy over time. And in this country there's been huge dramatic shifts in manufacturing and service sectors recently, and that brings with it lots of turmoil. So if we're talking about a shift to a green economy, we need to approach this a little differently than has been done in the past, and I think there's some hope for that we can be more caring and we can be more conscious about the changes that are going to take place. And even though any shift will have that turmoil, if we're approaching it with that knowledge and knowing that there's going to be lots of work to be done, that we can design a better system rather than have it come by accident.
Can I quickly say something?
Yes, please.
I don't feel I have any answers to this, but I feel it's a really crucial question. So 2 things I would say. One is, I personally think a green economy would be really positive in terms of the sorts of jobs it would create. And I think it's exactly the sorts of jobs that have actually been lost in our society as we've offshored a lot of manufacturing. And so I think there's particularly men, I mean it doesn't have to be men, but traditionally it has been men who've done these sort of semi-skilled production type jobs, and those are the jobs that have been exported to China or wherever. And I see the green economy as reshoring some of those jobs, but also, there'll be a lot of jobs in insulating homes, installing solar panels, a lot of sort of manual productive work, which is actually the kind of work that our economy is lacking. So I think that is a positive feature. Also, growing food, a positive feature of the green economy. But I have to say that the slight problem with that is that when I visit schools, I find that young people do not see that as an attractive future for them. I think young people have a rather unrealistic view of what work might be like, and an awful lot of them want to design computer games, I have to say. And there must be a limit to the number of computer games that can be designed. So I think we're doing something slightly wrong in our education system, just in, what is a useful job? I mean, I think clambering around on somebody's roof and installing solar panels is a tremendously useful job. But if you were 15, you'd probably think that working in marketing was a more useful job. So perhaps it's like, perhaps there is an issue there, I think, in what people think is constructive and useful as a role to play in society.
Alan?
Yeah, I'd just like to build on what Molly just said there. It's absolutely true. When we're looking at job creation, we're very obsessed as a nation, but particularly, well, probably because we have such a big aerospace industry around here, but we're very obsessed with those sort of 50, 60, 70, £100,000 engineering type jobs and the value that they bring. And one of the reasons why I get so excited about working in the environmental sector is that I get to work, particularly within, unashamedly say the circular economy is one of my favourite parts of it, is that you look at some of the projects that are coming in, some of the inward investment that's coming in, and some of the things that they're doing in terms of taking waste products and turning them into recyclers and putting value add. But those businesses, they do have some of the 50, 60, 70,000 pound type jobs within them, but actually the plethora of jobs is across the whole range, and it's exactly the sort of chemical processing type industries that we lost in the sort of 80s and 90s, and some of the manufacturing we lost, where those jobs are coming back, where you've got those sort of maybe lower skilled jobs, but actually with a career progression within them, where people can become a line manager, or can become a quality control manager, or whatever it may be. They've got an opportunity. But those sorts of jobs aren't necessarily around as much, but we're starting through this sector, starting to see real jobs coming through and real opportunity, and that's where I think we take whole communities, because you look at areas on the outskirts of Bristol. If you get those sorts of projects in Avonmouth, Sevenside, those kind of areas in volume, you'll be able to allow the people that live in those communities that used to be employed in those previous sectors to be able to re-engage.
Okay, other questions, please. There's a gentleman here, and then there's a gentleman right at the back.
I can probably say is that the power is in our hands. Is that, and by saying that, as I'm involved in 6 community energy schemes, from Baywind being the UK's first, probably. And what the power of saying that is the power of our pensions, or I should say, savings vehicles for retirement. And it is, you don't need to have a pension, you need to have something potentially that provides you an income. And I'll probably put this question kind of pointedly at Griffin to say the same thing. So I asked Anna Coote when she spoke a month ago, where is your pension invested? And she didn't know. And working for NEF, I was kind of shocked that she didn't know where, I assume it's a NEF pension scheme, that where your pensions are invested. And I hope you know, Griffin, but it's interesting to ask everyone. But my view is that the power is in our hands, and especially with like pension reform, is that we have potential not to buy pensions. We can get to historically 30% tax relief, putting it into community energy schemes. I had just seen it lining the office, and I was at a pension seminar a couple of nights ago, and I said to this to the room, and everyone kind of wanted to shut me up who was working for Fidelity, but it's ground up, do it for ourselves.
Yeah. You might be a bit disappointed, but I'm more disappointed that I don't have a pension. So I'm afraid I can't answer that too directly. But that actually is interesting. I mean, I'm a huge supporter of the divestment movement. I think that's one of the most exciting things happening in this space, and certainly not just for its practical outcomes in terms of starving the beasts of the large fossil fuel companies. That effect might be limited, but it just opens up such an interesting conversation about the future, really. And I find that it's the exact conversation that you want to be having once you say, okay, so what is this pension fund money going towards? And then you might start thinking about other areas of your life at the same time, because a lot of what we do is an investment of some sort. So yeah, I'll leave it there. That's interesting about deaf. I didn't know that. I'm going to think about that one.
There's a gentleman, I think, right.
I'd just like to address the education issue. I work in a primary school as an outdoor education specialist, and I'm optimistic about that. I've seen in education the kind of paradox of us perpetuating the world we're trying to prepare children for instead of preparing them for a new world that we want to create. And that is a difficulty, but I came to the Southwest because outdoor education is growing here seemingly faster than anywhere in the country. And I work in that to inspire children to connect with the land and hopefully then to feel that they could take jobs on the land and, you know, in forestry, in whatever kind of green sector to help renew the natural world. So that's that. I also wanted to echo Molly's point about societal redesign rather than throwing technologies and monies at systemic issues, because incentives and taking externalities and factoring them in and making organisations responsible seems to be such an important issue, whether it's community cooperatives, SMEs, transnational corporations, publicly owned amenities, whatever. They're all going to be subject to the same laws and need to same psychology, same behavioural change needed, no matter who's running it. So yeah, but on to my question. Is the nuts and bolts of everything that's been asked so far of these mechanisms of green economy are so important, but I feel that the elephant in the room when it comes to any issue of the economy is growth, as was asked at the start, and quantitative growth must end at some point. I mean, most people here have probably looked into the ecological perspective on that if it's using non-renewable natural resources, not just fossil fuels, but rare metals and yes, lots else, then quantitative growth must come to an end at a point. So if we are to redesign an economy and the mechanisms of economy, like the monetary system, positive interest on money, and how money is created as well, rather than being backed by debt and created privately as it is currently, which serves the interests of a lot of people who are at the top currently. How and when are we going to begin to address those issues? Are we ever going to be able to make a stable, steady state economy, a circular economy, as has been discussed?
So we're back in growth. Who wants to take that first? Okay.
Yeah, I basically agree with where you're coming from, and I think it's interesting how the green economy makes you think in a holistic kind of way, and everything all connects up, which is probably why I'm writing furiously when people are asking questions. I do think you're right about the importance of the quality versus quantity distinction when we talk about the economy. I think that there is a quantitative limit, but I also think that what we're talking about is reorganising what we do and thinking about the quality of what we do and focusing more on human relationships and connecting with your local environment and less on speedy movement and more stuff. So I think there's a lot we could do to achieve that. And I do think there are whole sectors that are of dubious benefit, if any benefit, and I would say much of what happens in the city is negative, not positive, and also, as you probably already know, I would have a bit of a go at a lot of marketing, which I think is basically creating dissatisfaction, and that's the purpose of it. So you go and buy another thing to seek satisfaction, which is always elusive. But yeah, let's get on to the, oh no, just want to say one more thing. You know, if you aren't convinced about this thing about economic growth, I would set you a question, which is, what can you do that creates a profit without producing carbon dioxide? And as we move towards renewable systems of energy, there might be answers to that question, but at the moment, I mean, Herman Daly set this question, and he suggested a lot of people will respond to that and say, well, you know, what about a culture? You know, let's think about a symphony orchestra. And he actually worked out how much carbon dioxide there was involved in putting on a classical concert, and it was massive. You know, I really wanted to follow through and do that bit of research myself, but now I'm no longer an academic, that probably won't happen. But, you know, although you think, oh, this is really low carbon activity, actually very often moving around and using energy, at the moment, I think it's quite hard to produce economic without producing carbon dioxide. On your question about money, I do think that the debt-based money system is intrinsic to the pressure for growth, because effectively, you know, if you can create money that didn't exist before, which is what banks do, then once you've created that money as a debt, people have to pay that debt back, and the way they pay that debt back is work that uses energy to produce stuff that's then sold. And so I think you're right. I think if you had a steady state economy, you'd have to redesign your money system, and you'd have government-produced money that you then taxed back in a sort of circular pattern, rather than having this mushrooming of money, which also leads to the unstable economy that Griffin was talking about at the beginning, but also keeps dragging the economy along to grow, to create value, to justify that money that's been created. So, yeah, I'm with you on that one as well. We do need to change the way the money system works. It would help us create a more equal society, but it's also inevitable if we're going to create a sustainable society, I think.
Other questions, please? Okay, there's one right here, and then one right at the back.
I just wanted to ask a question. I think, do you think we've missed an opportunity from 2008 in the crash, when all sorts of economic people were saying that the capitalist system has to change. This capitalist system is not working. How do we change it? And that was perhaps an opportunity then to change the references that we use. So the first question is, do you think we've missed the opportunity, and do we need some other cataclysmic activity to make us stop and think? And the other way of thinking is, can we be more idealistic and we've discussed this ourselves, is there an opportunity to tax the polluting products? Because at the present time, it's the green economy, the green products, the green services that are more expensive because of the actions that have been taken. So the added costs are hidden in the non-green economy, so people's perception of changing to a green economy is viewed as being more expensive.
So do we need another crisis to get people to wake up? And should we be taxing consumption more heavily?
So on the crisis opportunity point, absolutely, we weren't ready. And again, I would describe this as a narrative. We didn't have a narrative ready, whereas other people already had the solution. That the problem here is government spending. What needs to happen is austerity. They were ready for that. Exactly what happened, they had the solution. And I think part of the problem is simplicity versus complexity, because that narrative fits every problem. There's a free market solution for every problem out there, because it's just the same thing you say every time. Why is there a housing problem? Well, because there's too many constrictions, open up the land. Yeah, of course. It works as an explanation for everything. It's just incorrect, but it works. It applies to every situation. Whereas I find the arguments we're making are just so nuanced, and that's why I always come back to narrative, being like, we need that thing that joins it all together.
So you're going to be ready for the next crisis? Because, I mean, you know, you have the Financial Times and The Economist writing about the next crisis. They've been writing about it for at least a year. So are we going to be ready this time?
No, I don't think anyone thinks we're there right now. But I think that's our task, right, out of these things, is to be working on that narrative, as I was saying, building up coalitions, having projects that are ready. So when something comes up, because, I mean, there is some sort of, even in this crisis, which was very, you know, neoliberal in its response, did have things like a QE that was happening, and it was just kind of like, you know, indirect, going to banks and things like that. Like, there were some opportunities, even that neoliberal response, to do something positive there, and we even missed that. And maybe there's more hope on that one. You know, we've been talking about all sorts of like low carbon projects, and maybe we're making enough progress on that front. And maybe as more renewable technologies get rolled out, there's starting to be more and more people employed. My accent's Canadian, and so there's more people employed in the renewables industry in Canada than the tar sands. And you would have no idea, because the lobbying power is such that, you know, everyone on their tar sands, they're interacting with each other, they're unionized, whereas solar workers are all spread out. So it's things like joining up those people and saying, hey, there's actually so many of you that you're a real powerful group, you just don't know it yet.
From a sort of more commercial point of view, the crisis did one thing which has done one thing, several things actually, that I found amazing. Pre-2008, very few organisations were collaborating. The phrase social capital was never mentioned when you were looking for investments. And I think post-2008, if you're looking at something where people really started to look at their waste, their inefficiency, the ways that they can improve things, and that's why I think we're now in a more innovative period of cycle at the moment. Companies are springing forth with great ideas, great projects. But there is a change. I feel that there's a sea change. Everything at the moment involves collaborating with people, which is great. You know, it's a far less selfish way of doing business. I've been in business 20 years, and I have to say, you know, this last 6-7 years has been one of the best times I've ever worked in industry, because actually people want to do things. There's a movement, a feeling of wanting to try and take innovation to market, to find better ways of doing things, find more intelligent ways of financing stuff. And all of those things have happened, I think, because of the crisis. I think, unfortunately, we're nowhere near ready for another major crisis, and you know, there is talk that we won't be ready for another 15 years. You know, to be able to take the kind of hit that we had last time. But I do feel that society is better for what happened in 2008. Although I do say,
no way, that's rubbish. That's rubbish. I can't sit here and listen to that. 0 hours contracts, offshoring of jobs. Greece. Yeah, Greece. I mean, it's absolutely appalling. Your sharing agenda has fundamentally destroyed people's lives. We've had Atos, we've had people forced off benefits, we've got a rise in homelessness, we've got food banks. Don't sit there and tell me that things are better. They're not better. They're better for the rich, the super rich.
People are committing suicide.
Yeah, that's garbage.
Control. Society is not better.
It's not better.
I can only talk from personal experience, and in the business community.
Well, basically, you lose your job.
In the business community, people are working together, and there's more cohesion, there's more collaboration, and there's more people coming together, and they're finding better ways of doing stuff, less reliant on debt and things like that. Organisations are actually working their way through a lot of the problems. But I actually agree with you. I'm not actually disagreeing with what you've just said. If you look at the global picture and the effects that the crisis has had on wider communities, then yeah, well, I'm talking about the business community that I represent, and I have to say I think it's a much better place to be working than it was in pre-2008. But that's mainly because people are actually taking on responsibility for things and working together. I find it much more cohesive. So I'm not disagreeing with
that might be your sector, but in general, things aren't better. They're not better for a lot of people in this country.
Now, there is a gentleman just behind you who has the microphone. Do you have a question or something?
Thanks very much. I come from a background of the techie stuff, and in comparison with the economic crisis, technology is dead easy. It really is almost linear thinking, although there are some interesting non-linear bits in science and technology. But economics seems to me to be incredibly complicated, and I get the impression that the economists, no disrespect intended, aren't necessarily coming too clean about just how confused economics is. And there was a fascinating program a few months about I think it was Manchester Business School, asking, well, why is it that we didn't see this crisis coming? Is our fundamental understanding of economics flawed? To which there was an astounding silence, and in fact there were some rather unsavoury sanctions against those academics who decided that they would stand up and say, yeah, actually, hands up, we really didn't understand this one. So maybe what I'm sensing here, going back in the history of science, is that there are all sorts of strange additions to try and explain planetary motion until some bright guy decided that gravity might be the answer. Are we looking for a Newton or somebody equivalent in the world of economics to try and shine a light that brings together all of these disparity, all these elements of confusion where it's almost a statement of belief about how economics works? And we're talking about people like Friedman and his rather unpleasant influences in South America. You know, people like that had incredible power because they had the conviction of a true believer. How can we get the world of economy, of the economists, to say we don't actually know what's going on. We've got pieces of the picture. We haven't got the big picture. Let's be honest. Let's see what elements might be coming together, because green economy, absolutely fine. The technology, not a problem with that. It's how it all hangs together. I think you guys have already mentioned it. But that's something we have to become really quite honest about and engage in that narrative and create that rich picture so that we've all got something of a feel for what's going on. And not, that may create a kind of wisdom of uncertainty. You just said, somebody said earlier, business likes to have certainty. Well, maybe it needs to work with the sense of uncertainty and have the courage of its convictions in that field of uncertainty. I don't know what the question is.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Economic. I think I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I think the mistake you're making is thinking that economics might be like physics. You know, Newton could be right because the physical laws are pretty much fixed, although actually Einstein proved he was wrong, didn't he? But anyway, you know, at least within the world we live in, there are absolute laws. Economics is political. People make up rules. And what's happened is that since sort of the, you know, I don't know, probably about the same time that wages started falling in my graph, in fact, it was 1947, wasn't it, the foundation of the Montpellier Society. Who will tell me if I've got the wrong date, but it was around then. You know, they all got together and they thought, well, we've had enough of workers voting better conditions for themselves, we're going to crack down on that, and they invented neoliberalism. And they've sold that massively as an intellectual project. It's nothing to do with the reality, it's nothing to do with laws of physics, it's to do with a political project that serves certain people. And that has become deliberately disseminated in universities, so for people like Andrew and me, when I was an academic, it's very hard to get on. You know, money and power have been used to suppress alternative views in economics. I must just have a quick go at the missed opportunity question, because I don't think we missed an opportunity. Personally, I think Gordon Brown missed an opportunity, because I thought for a long time that, I thought the crisis was coming, and I think Gordon Brown did as well, because he set up a lot of things that would cost us now, and if the financial system collapsed, they'd be free, like PFI. So, you know, I think that was quite cunning of him, but when that, and also, you know, he grew up in the sort of Scottish West Coast Communist Party, so he kind of had a pretty crisis-driven view of how economies work anyway. But then when that moment came, I think he completely bottled it. And, you know, he did stand there and save the financial system, but then he should have continued to hold on to that and make it work for all of us. But that's the point at which he bottled it, and he said, oh, well, I'm just going to go back to private enterprise. But don't forget, we've still got an opportunity. We still owe 85% of the Royal Bank of Scotland. This government will try and sell that back, but we should be holding that as a public bank, which we could then use to invest in exactly the sorts of projects we want to see happening. I do think there was a point at which some kind of extraordinary revolutionary change was possible. It was kind of about Christmas 2009, from what I recall. People have got amazingly naffed off about what would happen. But the truth is, who's going to make that happen? Who's going to go and pick up that power? And would we want some person to do that anyway? I think what was wrong was our theory of change, myself. And I think that's what we need to work on. But I don't think the opportunity's gone away, mainly because the crisis hasn't gone away. We've ended up in this deflationary spiral now, which tells you the economy is still in a situation, unprecedented situation of crisis, I would say. And yeah, so, and also because people have not forgotten what happened, they know perfectly well that we were defrauded by the banks, and they haven't forgiven that either, which is why you're very angry that that's been turned into a narrative to beat up on poor people, and I agree with you about that. Just one thing, while I'm being a bit gloomy, I will just mention the Energiewende in Germany, because that is a very good example of people using a crisis as an opportunity to make massive change, because following the Fukushima disaster, the Germans completely re-evaluated their energy policy, and they're rapidly moving on Energiewende, which means energy transition, towards a fully renewable system. And you can follow them on Twitter or just check that out, Energiewende. It's so encouraging what they're doing. We're just not hearing about it, but yesterday there was a tweet, you know, showed a very ordinary German village. It produced 236% of the energy, of the electricity it needed last year. That's the kind of thing that's happening in Germany. Rural communities, huge boom from developing renewables, and that's what we could be seeing here. In fact, we've got more opportunities here, we've got more renewable potential here.
We are just about to wrap up, and I'll ask for some closing words from Anne and then from you, please.
Just if I may, on Molly's last point there about in Germany, 65% of their energy is going through the community energy, compared to 10% here. So I would support fully that there is this huge opportunity to do that here. What I would say is that, you know, this is a huge opportunity. You know, there is lots going on. opportunity to engage, I mean, for everyone. It really is. The sector is very, very exciting. There isn't enough people working in the sector. There is massive job opportunities. There's lots of innovation, which means there's lots of opportunity to engage with different projects. You know, I think it's very, very exciting, and I still stand by the fact that I think having a classification of the green economy is probably beyond our reach, actually, but I think we're making great strides towards greening our economy, and I'm very excited to be involved with it.
Yeah, so on the point about economics and what's wrong with it, I actually find this a really interesting question because it could go two different ways. There's problems with economics as a theory, or there's problems with economics in how it's practiced. And I think there are some issues definitely with economics as a theory. I think a lot of what's happening though is there are definitely good ideas in there in economics, but it's been taken over by a certain view of economics. I mean, in its most basic form, economics is theory of scarce resources, and I think most people in this room have something to say about that, and there's certainly lots of economists in history that have useful things for this conversation. So, sorry if I end on an upbeat, corny note, but what I would actually say is don't get disengaged from economics just because it's practiced in one way. Because as someone, you know, that wears an economics hat, it's a lonely space sometimes if you're talking about green economy, because that's not the way the field is moving. And so we need more people that have these sorts of sensibilities to get involved in reclaimed economics, because it is the language that decision makers are using right now, for better or for worse.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you all very much. I must say, just as a parting shot, whenever I think about economics, I'm reminded of Voltaire, who said, "Doubt is uncomfortable, but certainty is absurd." Thank you all very much.